Hello, this is Karl-James Langford. This is a video log looking at Guy Fawkes. We celebrate, well I don't, the events of the 5th of November 1605. And the events of the 1605, seemingly people celebrate the execution of Guy Fawkes. We celebrate the execution of Guy Fawkes by a large bonfire and throwing effigies of Guy Fawkes onto very large fires, and people seem to relish in defacing the memory of Guy Fawkes. People seemingly look at those fireworks and they are happy that Guy Fawkes had seemingly been killed so that they can have this celebration. I absolutely think it's disgusting and abhorrent in a modern day society that we celebrate the death of an individual. I think whether Guy Fawkes, whether an evil guy or whether he was a good guy, I think that whether Guy Fawkes knew what he was doing or he didn't know what he was doing, or whether he was a Protestant or Catholic and so on, I don't think he should have been treated in this way leading up to his execution. The way that we will briefly explain, I don't feel that it's acceptable that we should celebrate with gunpowder, fire, the death of this individual. Guy Fawkes, seemingly, we believe, was born on the 13th of April 1570 and died not on the 5th of November, but actually died on the 31st of January 1606. He endured 3 months of absolute agony and torture. 3 months that nobody would wish themselves to be put through. This individual didn't deserve the death he received, and he didn't deserve all the torturing. I feel for one now, and I realised this a few days ago, that I'm no longer going to be looking at those fireworks or bonfires because I just don't agree with it. I don't think it's acceptable. I think that the millions of people in this country celebrating the death of somebody I think is absolutely horrific. And how dare you think it's good that we should celebrate the death of somebody? Now, Guy Fawkes, we look at his life, and he had a life of adventure. He had an unfortunate life in his early years when his dad died at the age of, well, let's start again. His dad died when he was 8 years old. He was a Catholic, and after the death of Queen Elizabeth I in 1603, King James came to the throne. Leading up to this point, leading up to Guy Fawkes' death, and he was 35 when he died, or some say his date of birth may have been earlier or later than the 13th of April, but it was roughly 35. The events leading to his demise were about a large number of barrels of gunpowder were placed in the undercroft of Westminster Palace. The gunpowder was placed there so that he could blow up King James I and large numbers of members of Parliament when Parliament was opened. Now, the effigies of Guy Fawkes take many forms when they're burnt, but when the effigies of Guy Fawkes are being burnt, they seemingly point towards that this guy was the only one involved in this conspiracy, supposedly. But in fact, there were a number of other conspirators, a large number of conspirators, and they were led by a certain individual known as Robert Catesby. A little bit more about Guy Fawkes is that he was extensively involved in a campaign, the 8 Years' War, He was involved on the side of Catholic Spain, and he was involved in the conflict, and his bravery was seen to such an extent, and his ability to war, that he was recommended for a captaincy. And there was some success of the Spanish against the various factors in the 8 Years' War. And he saw that when King James was incorporated as king by 1604, he saw that that this new king, this Protestant king, this Scottish king, should be denounced, and that all papists should rise against this new Protestant king. Now, Guy Fawkes was a chosen name. He chose it because it was his campaigning name in Spain, and he was seen to be, this was a testimony of him, he was seen to be a pleasant of approach, cheerful of manner, opposed to quarrels and strife, loyal to his friends. From that very description, he doesn't seem to be an individual that should be executed in the way he was executed. He was a highly skilled in matters of war. He was a tall, powerful built man with thick reddish brown hair, a flowing moustache in the tradition of the time, and a bushy reddish brown beard. Sounded more like a Santa Claus figure than somebody who was downright evil and intent in killing hundreds of individuals. A man of action, capable of intelligent argument, as well as physical endurance, somewhat to the surprise of his enemies. These are all descriptions written about the individual. The conspiracy was devised on the 20th of May 1604, a Sunday on the Sabbath, amazingly enough, and it was the very man himself, Guy Fawkes, Robert Catesby, and the other conspirators there, all met in the Duck and Drake in the fashionable Strand district of London. And thinking about this, and thinking about all the events, and the likes of Thomas Percy as well, the conspirators rented a house to the House of Lords in December 1604, and location and where this was is maybe some debate, and they decided to tunnel into directly the Undercroft underneath the House of Lords. It said, according to Fawkes, 20 barrels of gunpowder were brought into the Undercroft. 20 barrels of gunpowder, not the large barrels of gunpowder you see in lots of descriptions, probably barrels of gunpowder that one man could carry, and then eventually, then we got precise dates, and yeah, eventually by about the 20th of July, 16 other barrels were taken into the Undercroft. And these barrels of gunpowder remained there. The gunpowder plot was actually delayed because the opening of Parliament was delayed, and it might be that it said some descriptions that the barrels may have been damp and may not have been appropriate for an explosion, which is sort of ironic that in God's name the blowing up of King James was delayed, and eventually it did not actually take place. Fawkes himself didn't seemingly stay around the gunpowder all points and his involvement and so on. There's lots of information written about this and lots of channels we can go in. Now, it's said, however, that the plot was revealed. On the evening of the 26th of October, Lord Montague, a prominent Catholic in Parliament, one of few, received an anonymous letter warning him to stay away and to retire yourself into your home. Hence, you may expect the event in so far they shall receive a terrible blow, this Parliament. Despite quite quickly becoming aware of the letter, informed by one of Montague's servants, the conspirators resolved to continue with their plan. As it appeared that it was clearly thought to be a hoax, Fawkes checked the Undercroft on the 30th of October and reported that nothing had been disturbed, everything was fine. A few days to go. Montague's suspicions had been aroused, however, and the letter was shown to King James. The king ordered a certain Sir Thomas Kevet to conduct a search of the cellars underneath Parliament, which he did in the early hours of the 5th of November. Fawkes had taken up his station late on the previous night, armed with a slow match and a watch given to him by Thomas Percy, one of the other conspirators, because he should know how the time went away. He was found leaving the cellar shortly after midnight and arrested. Inside, the barrels of gunpowder were discovered, hidden under piles of firewood and coal. Now, it's interesting that he's arrested leaving the cellar, simply because we got images of him sitting there for month upon month, ready to undertake his actions, and we see constant images, some that we've seen in front of us, that he's found with the gunpowder. He's actually leaving it probably for a pee break or something, or he just wanted to get some sleep. It was probably really cold in the Undercroft of Parliament. Now, Fawkes, in his first interrogation, gave the name of John Johnson. Of course, we haven't alluded to his real name yet, and his intent was clear, and in responding, "To blow you Scot beggars back to your native mountains," he said. And he identified himself as a 36-year-old Catholic, which was correct, from Netherdale in Yorkshire. And he was seen, and all this was reported to King James, as he was seen by King James as of a Roman resolution. But King James needed, as an early king, to be seen to have his job done in pursuing this individual. John Johnson had to be tortured in King James's eyes to reveal the rest of the conspirators. It was to be seen a gradual torture, where the use of manacles and the rack was to be seen. And maybe in the king's words, or a writer of the king, he was to be seen as the gentle of tortures are to be first used and then worsened, maybe. Fawkes was transferred to the Tower of London eventually, and where all torturers had to be taken and so on. It was asked when and where he learned to speak French, and if he was a papist who brought up in it. And subsequently, the room that he went to was referred to as the Guy Fawkes room. Now, Lieutenant of the Tower, who supervised the torture, Sir William Wade, did eventually obtain a confession. We've got a signature of Guy Fawkes, which we're seeing within these videos today. And I feel it's unusual that actually on the night of the 6th of November, he spoke with William Wade, and he for the advancement of the Catholic faith and saving his soul, said that the inward secrets of his thoughts and all his accomplishments were given and received, and in conversations, this was to be the undertaking of death for 4 of the other conspirators. Now, all this being said, and quite long-winded, I feel that there's no real malice in Guy Fawkes' heart, and he'd have probably given us information anyway. There were other plotters revealed as well, and altogether, the trial of all 8 plotters, and the some that actually escaped the noose, began on Monday the 27th of January, and Fawkes was identified as Guido Fawkes. He pleaded not guilty, despite his apparent acceptance of guilt from the moment he was captured. Whatever that means is open for some debate. Fawkes at this point, after 3 months of torture, would have been in a right state of mind. The outcome of the trial and the trial of the other defendants was that they were found guilty. The Lord Chief Justice, Sir John Popham, proclaimed them guilty of high treason. Back then, the sentence for high treason was to be carried out, and individuals condemned would be drawn backwards to his death by a horse, his head near the ground, but not fully dead. They were to be put to death halfway between heaven and earth, as unworthy of both. Their genitals would be cut off and burnt before their eyes, and their bowels were ripped open and the hearts removed, whilst they were still pumping their blood. They would then be decapitated. At this point they would be dead, and the dismemberment parts of their body displayed, so that they might be prey for the fowls of the air. On the 31st of January 1606, Fawkes and 3 others, Thomas Wintour, Ambrose Rookwood and Robert Keyes, were dragged from the Tower on wattled hurdles to the old palace yard at Westminster, opposite the building they had attempted to destroy. Quite ironic. His fellow plotters were then hanged and quartered. Fawkes was the last to stand on the scaffold. He asked for forgiveness of the king and state, while keeping up his crosses and idle ceremonies. Weakened by torture and aided by the hangman, Fawkes began to climb the ladder to the noose. Very weak at this point. How he survived, I don't know. But either through jumping to his death or climbing too high so the rope was incorrectly set, he managed to avoid the agony of the terrible death that he had seen, that Thomas Wintour, Ambrose Rookwood and Robert Keyes had suffered. And in doing so, with all that in his memory, he didn't suffer the execution of them, and he broke his neck. His lifeless body was nevertheless quartered. It didn't do the audience much good. They probably all wandered away, and was the custom. His body parts were then distributed to the 4 corners of the kingdom, to be displayed as a warning to others that who may be conspirators or traitors against the king and the Protestant faith that ruled the land. Now, with all that said, I feel that celebrating Guy Fawkes Night is something that I'll no longer do. I feel that all these years on, we should feel that the 13 conspirators in total, some were killed before the trial. All 13 conspirators, memory should be laid to rest, and Fawkes, as one of those conspirators, his life should be rather celebrated as a being on this planet for his good deeds, for his life, rather than what he was accused of. And I, for one, next year will be lighting a candle to his memory, and maybe this has convinced some of you others out there to be sensible and no longer celebrate Guy Fawkes night, bonfire night. And one last thing, bonfire night is actually believed to have been contrived in the background of the celebration of All Hallows Eve. As some of us already know, All Hallows Eve was once a 3-day festivity, both a Christian and a non-Christian festivity, and it's very close to Halloween, the 31st of October, and some believe that it was a way of moving some of the traditions from Halloween so that it could be forgotten to this new night of the 5th of November. Typical Christian way of changing and altering festivities and taking information that they wanted from a festivity to a new festivity, either 5th of November. This is Karl-James Langford talking of my Guy Fawkes Day. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.